Welcome back. The escalation of water shedding in South Africa, including the significant impact on Gauteng, is a growing concern. The potential repercussions for economic growth and political stability are substantial, as water security is identified as a major risk for the country. To help us unpack this further, we're joined by Professor David Walwyn, a climate specialist at the University of Pretoria. Prof, thank you so much for your time and for joining us this evening. Now, the Department of Water and Sanitation released a report, a number of reports recently with regards to the green, the blue and the no drop reports, and these paint a very concerning picture with regards to this essential resource. What would you say are the key warnings and indicators regarding water scarcity in our country?
Indeed, those reports were contained a lot of bad news in terms of our water resources. If I were to just comment directly on those reports, first of all, the reports indicated that there's extreme contamination of our existing supplies due to failure of the water treatment facilities that exist in the municipalities. So I think the figure was something like 68% of wastewater treatment facilities in the country fail to adequately process the incoming water. That was the one issue. I think the second issue, perhaps that's coming out of this whole area, the water area, is the issue about the maintenance of existing infrastructure and how much water is lost in the reticulation or distribution of that water. So the figure for South Africa is about 40% of the incoming water that comes from the larger water authorities is lost in the reticulation process. And that's also very concerning. So I think, overall, the Department of Water and Sanitation, those reports paint, as you said, a rather bleak picture about the state of our water resources. And the three issues are certainly that we're losing a lot of water in the reticulation process. Secondly, that the wastewater treatment facilities are not operating to the required standard. And the third issue, which I haven't mentioned, is the issue of the treatment of water prior to consumption. That's something like 51% of the water that is actually supplied to consumers doesn't meet the required microbiological standards. So it's contaminated even before it gets into the households. Yeah, so those three are the main summary points from those reports.
So, Prof, with that said, can we say that we don't necessarily have a scarcity issue, but rather a water management issue?
We also have a scarcity issue, and the scarcity issue, in fact, has been an ongoing discussion as long as I can remember, and probably as long as records have been kept. So it's always been recognized that South Africa is a water scarce country and that we have to do something about securing adequate supplies of water for the growing population in the country. And that was the background to the Lesotho Highlands Water Scheme, and other schemes that are now being established in order to obtain water from sources other than rainfall and hence dams. That the question isn't just a question of reticulation and poor water services, although that's now an issue of major concern. So if I were to comment on why is this report that has just been issued, why is it important? Why are we bringing this again to the attention of South Africa? I think that the three issues that are very important in the present context are, first of all, water shedding, which you mentioned right in the beginning, that we hadn't even had this term water shedding in 2023. Now suddenly 2024, we're talking about it. That's the first context change. The second one is the issue about climate crisis and the fact that the global warming is going to increase the variability in terms of water supply and particularly rainfall. And then the third issue, which I think is very important, is the overall one about water scarcity. And that is that we are rapidly approaching the point at which the total rainfall is insufficient to meet total demand. In other words, if everyone were to get adequate supplies of water, there simply isn't enough rainfall in the country to cover that demand.
I mean, Prof, speaking of that, it also says that water demand is expected to sharply increase over the next 20 years, while the water supply is likely to decline, therefore anticipating a projected supply deficit of 17% by 2030.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge figure. Of course, there are lots of assumptions in those figures. And I mean, these kind of doomsday predictions I've been hearing since probably 1995 or maybe even earlier than that. But I think the point is correct, is that we are a water scarce country and we have to look carefully at how to solve this problem over the longer term. And I mean, I think I would to coin a term, I would call it the four fixes that we need to address. And the first fix is certainly this issue of new infrastructure. So we need to look at the Lesotho Highlands Water Scheme Phase 2 and other infrastructural investments, major infrastructural investments, which are necessary to ensure water security. The second is the point that you were making earlier about the existing infrastructure. We have to jack up the quality of the work that's done at municipality level in terms of maintenance of the existing infrastructure to ensure that we can claw back the 40% of water that is lost even before it gets into the homes of consumers or the factories of the manufacturing sector. And then the other two fixes that we need to pay attention to, one is to stop contamination of existing supplies. In other words, we have to look carefully at the wastewater treatment plants that are supposed to be treating the water and to make sure that those are operating correctly. And then finally is the question of water efficiency. So it's a bit of a moving goalpost. If we assume the same level of water efficiency or inefficiency that we presently are accustomed to, then yes, we'll run out of water very quickly. But over time, water efficiencies have improved. And so it's likely that that date will be extended. But you can't continue to grow a population and you can't continue to grow a manufacturing sector when there's inadequate supplies of water to support that at the same level of consumption.
I mean, with the four fixes, Prof, you mentioned contamination, and earlier on you spoke of the 51% of the water provided specifically to the poor being contaminated and having bad microbiological particles within that water. What are those implications associated with South Africa's water scarcity, especially when it comes to our vulnerable and marginalized communities?
Yeah, I mean, the implications are very severe. And, we've had several cholera crises in the country, and that's directly the consequence of inadequate treatment of potable water prior to distribution. And so we're already seeing the consequences of this kind of collapse of capability at the local authority level. And I mean, I think that's common across all public goods. So if we just talk about public goods, which would be roads, clean air, clean water, adequate infrastructure to support private lives. We've seen over the last 10, 15 years this not really destruction, but just the dissolution of capability, particularly at local authority levels. And President Ramaphosa has already indicated in the opening address of this in 2024 about how it's very important to address this lack of capability at local authority levels. And so to me, that would be an essential requirement. I would put that at top of my list in terms of priorities for getting government to do the work that it's supposed to be doing. And that would be to have, I think one would need skilled teams of skilled people who would be able to travel around the country, visiting local authorities and determining what the issues are, providing the skills that are necessary to return those facilities to their working state. So this is a complicated and a bit of a long-term process, but it's something that the country needs to embark upon. It's essential for the provision of public goods that the capability at local authority level is strengthened and brought back to the level that where we can have water security again.
Prof, quite often when we speak about water, we only and mostly think about people and the marginalized communities. How much of an impact does this have on our economies? We know that the Orange, the Vaal, as well as the Limpopo River have got big contributions with regards to industrial development and our economies. Are we seeing a shift and an impact in those industries because of the scarcity?
Look, I think that the water shedding crisis in Johannesburg and elsewhere in the country has brought a response from business that it needs to make sure that it has contingency plans in the event that, that this is an ongoing problem in terms of water supply. It certainly has an impact. In a business which is in the center of the city and you need water to flush the loos and to make cups of tea, it's not such a big issue, maybe. And in any case, it would be a relatively small investment, which would be necessary in order to provide storage facilities and possibly even treatment facilities. So some businesses are now able to claim that they're completely off grid and they're completely off water. Or centralized water distribution. But that's not true of large manufacturing entities. And many manufacturing businesses are heavily dependent on water. I always think the interesting thing is something like to make a liter of beer, you need 7 liters of water, or to make a liter of wine, you need 12 liters of water. So the manufacture of many products, many food products, many other products requires extensive quantities of water. Even electricity requires extensive quantities of water. And it's simply not possible to go off centralized water distribution for those companies. But in this report, it's, I guess, urging the question that businesses need to declare, first of all, what their reliance is on centralized water systems. And secondly, they need to declare what their contingency plans are in the event that these supplies collapse and hence prevent them from undertaking their normal operations.
Earlier on, you mentioned, Prof, that the issue of scarcity in South Africa has been a long-standing concern. Where could we benchmark from? Are we the only countries that are unique to South Africa in terms of the scarcity? And can we benchmark from certain countries that are experiencing the kind of scarcity that we are experiencing with water supply in order for us to start finding low-hanging fruits and finding solutions for this problem?
Yeah, we certainly can learn from other countries. We're not by any means the worst off in a list of countries in terms of water resources. There are many countries that are almost totally desert, and I'll include many countries in North Africa in that category, and in the Middle East, where water supplies are very minimal. So in some ways, we kind of sit in the middle of the bunch in respect of water availability. But we can certainly learn from the drier countries as to how to manage water resources. And the 4 fixes are, I think, good enough. But I mean, one particular example that I could give is the use of reverse osmosis together with renewable energy in order to produce potable water from seawater. And there are many countries in the Middle East that are already using this technology at large scale. It's very expensive to operate, but with renewable energy, it's come down and cost a lot. So one can start to produce potable water, which is drinking water, using alternative technologies. But I think in the region, we have resources which have not yet been tapped. So there was the Lesotho Highlands Water Scheme, and there's phase 2 of the Lesotho Highlands Water Scheme. But in sub-Saharan Africa, there are large water resources which we may be able to access through intergovernmental agreements. So, I still go back to my 4 fixes and say this is where we should start. And number 1 is new infrastructure investment to ensure that we have water availability. But I think there's an awful lot that can be done to make better use of our existing water resources, where we can learn from other countries, but which simply they don't require much learning. We simply need to get on and do the job properly. We know what to do, we're just not doing it properly.
All right, Prof, thank you so much for your time and for your insights this evening. It certainly has been valuable. That was Professor David Walwyn, who's a climate specialist at the University of Pretoria, speaking to us there about how we can find those fixes in ensuring that we do preserve the water that we have for generations to come.